You would never believe the extremely heartbreaking and tragic event that has happened to Rick Warren, one of the most influential pastors of our time. You might know him as the author of The Purpose-Driven Life, a book that has sold over 50 million copies worldwide, or as the founder of Saddleback Church, one of America's largest megachurches. However, do you know that behind the pulpit lies an extremely dark and disturbing detail, an event Rick has had to deal with far away from the public eye? The question is, what is this heartbreaking news? And what happens when a strong leader, someone who has spent his life helping others, suddenly faces a battle of his own? What happens when the man who has encouraged so many now needs encouragement himself? Stick around as we find out Rick Warren's journey to global influence. Do you know that before he became a household name, Rick Warren was just a small-town boy with big dreams? Well, it turns out that his childhood was very eventful. And even as a child, he had to deal with so many challenges that shaped his entire perspective on life. Rick was born on January 28, 1954, in San Jose, California, but his roots go much deeper into small-town America. He was raised in Ukiah, California, a quiet little town surrounded by nature, where life was simple and everyone knew each other. His father, Jimmy Warren, was a Baptist minister, and his mother, Dot Warren, was a high school librarian. Now, imagine growing up in a home where faith, books, and service to others were part of your daily life. That was Rick's world. His father wasn't just a preacher, he was also a skilled carpenter whose favorite thing to do was build churches, especially in villages that had been devastated by poverty or disaster. As a matter of fact, throughout Rick's childhood, he watched his dad help construct churches across the country, brick by brick, and that experience planted a seed in his heart, one that would eventually grow into something much bigger than he could have ever imagined. Here's where things start to get interesting. You see, even as a child, Rick wasn't your typical kid. While other children were obsessed with sports or cartoons, young Rick was fascinated by leadership and faith. He started reading books on theology and leadership at a very young age, way before most kids even thought about what they wanted to do in life. By the time he was a teenager, it was pretty clear to everyone around him that Rick was destined for something greater. The signs were so clear to see, and so, at just 19 years old, he felt a powerful calling to become a pastor. He didn't know exactly how it would happen, but he knew one thing for sure. He wanted to serve God and help others find their purpose. After high school, Rick went on to study at California Baptist University, and at this point, his vision to change the world through ministry became even clearer. He wasn't just talking about it, he was already taking action. In November 1973, Rick and a friend skipped classes and drove 350 miles to hear the legendary pastor W.A. Criswell preach at the Jack Tar Hotel in San Francisco. Do you know that Warren actually waited afterward to shake hands with Pastor Criswell? And something special happened. Apparently, while shaking hands with him, Criswell looked Rick in the eyes and said, "I feel led to lay my hands on you and pray for you." That moment just proved to Rick that he was on the right path and destined for more. During his college days, he began organizing Bible studies and small gatherings where he helped people connect to faith in a way that was fresh and inspiring. But Rick wasn't done yet. He wanted more. He decided to dig deeper into theology, so he continued his studies at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Texas. It was at this point that he actually learned the foundations of ministry, leadership, and church planting. While in seminary, Rick had a life-changing moment, one that would define his entire future. One day, while reading a magazine, he came across an article about the fastest-growing counties in America. One name caught his eye: Orange County, California. Something inside him clicked, and he felt an unshakable calling to start a church there. But here's the crazy part. At that point, he had no money, no building, and no congregation. All he had was a dream and a deep trust in God. And guess what? That was enough. So, in 1980, fresh out of seminary, Rick and his wife, Kay, packed their bags and moved to Orange County. There, they started their church in the most unexpected place: a living room. Yep, you heard that right. No fancy building, no big stage, just a handful of people gathered in a small home. Well, the good thing is that the tiny group grew faster than anyone expected. Within weeks, more and more people started showing up, to the extent that they had to move to a high school gym just to fit everyone. And from there, Saddleback Church exploded in growth. eventually becoming one of the largest and most influential churches in the world. Today, Rick Warren is not just a pastor, he's a global leader, an author whose books have changed millions of lives, and a man whose faith-driven mission continues to inspire people all over the world. But you would think that a man like Rick Warren, who has sacrificed so much for the church, would be exempt from trials and tribulations. But that's not the case. Despite almost single-handedly building one of the largest and most influential churches in the world, and being at the forefront of preaching to the world about faith and hope, Rick Warren has had to deal with some extremely devastating losses. Rick, Warren's greatest heartbreak. Behind all the success, the sermons, and the best-selling books, Rick Warren is also a father to 3 children. But unfortunately, he's also a father who faced a loss no parent should ever have to endure. In 2013, the world was shocked by the extremely tragic news of Rick's son, Matthew Warren's passing. But what shocked everyone more was not just his early passing, but the extremely heartbreaking manner in which the tragedy had happened. Matthew Warren, the youngest of Rick and Kay Warren's 3 children, was born in 1985. From the very start, he was a bright, kind-hearted boy with a deep compassion for others. His parents always pointed out the fact that he had a soft spot for people who were struggling. Whether it was a kid at school who felt left out or someone dealing with pain, Matthew was always willing to help. But behind his loving personality, he had a heartbreaking, silent battle that very few people could see. Unfortunately, from a very young age, Matthew struggled with severe depression and mental health challenges. His parents noticed that their sweet, caring boy was carrying a silent and heavy burden. By the time he was a teenager, it was clear that Matthew was dealing with something much deeper than just sadness. This unfortunate struggle lasted for decades, and Rick and Kay did every single thing they could to help. They prayed, they sought out the best doctors, and they provided all the love and support they had. But as anyone who has dealt with mental health challenges knows, it's not always that simple. One thing Rick has always talked about is how faith and mental health are not separate issues. Rick believed that just because someone believes in God doesn't mean they're immune to depression. And just because someone struggles with depression doesn't mean they don't love God. Matthew loved Jesus deeply, but his battle was also real. Sneaky. April 5th, 2013, at just 27 years old, Matthew Warren tragically lost his life due to mental health struggles. The Warren family and the entire Christian community were thrown into mourning, and this tragic event shook the entire Warren family to their core. In a letter to their congregation, Rick and Kay Warren wrote, "No words can express the anguished grief we feel right now. Our youngest son, Matthew, was an incredibly kind, gentle, and compassionate young man. He had a brilliant intellect and a gift for making people laugh, but he struggled from birth with mental illness, dark holes of depression, and sad thoughts." Matthew's passing was not just a devastating loss for their family. It was a wake-up call for churches, communities, and people everywhere to start talking about mental health issues and faith in a more open and understanding way. Losing a child is a pain that never fully goes away, but instead of letting grief consume them, Rick and Kay Warren made a powerful decision to use their pain to help others. Just a year after Matthew's passing, they launched the Hope for Mental Health initiative at Saddleback Church. Their mission was clear. No one should ever feel alone in their struggles, no one should feel ashamed of their mental health, and no family should suffer in silence. They started speaking openly about their loss. Rick Warren began sharing messages about how faith and mental health are connected. Kay Warren, on her part, became a fierce advocate for mental health awareness, especially in churches where these topics were often ignored. But, like it or not, Rick and his entire family were faced with questions from the world and members of the Christian community about his son's passing. This was especially true because Rick had previously shared several sermons about hope, joy, and living a purpose-driven life. Some wondered why his son had not listened to these sermons, and many even questioned Rick's faith, saying that he could not save his own child. However, one of the most powerful things Rick has said about this tragedy is this. People always ask, why didn't God heal Matthew? And I tell them, God did heal him, just not on this side of eternity. That message resonated with millions and reminded people that mental health struggles do not define a person's faith. It also reminded people that seeking help is not a sign of weakness and that the church should be a safe place for those battling mental health struggles. Rick also spoke about how he received messages from over 10,000 people about their own mental health struggles within the church community. And in the usual Rick Warren fashion, he has found a way to discover the purpose in his pain. To this day, because of his advocacy both inside and outside the Saddleback Church, more churches have started opening up about mental health. More pastors have started talking about depression from the pulpit, and more people have reached out for the help they need without shame or fear. In an interview, Rick spoke about how he's happy that other churches can look up to him and his church as a role model when it comes to heavy and sensitive discussions, such as mental health issues. He said, "Our goal is, as we say, we crack the door open, and then churches go, okay, if the diocese is doing this, if Saddleback's doing this, we can do this. And we'd love to see a movement started where people actually begin to say, we need to see this element added to our local ministry." It was Rick's daughter, Amy, who spoke up about how her brother's struggles and eventual passing truly affected the Warren family and how it shaped their family dynamics. And that's when the world realized that behind all the smiles and powerful sermons, Rick Warren and his entire family were going through difficult challenges. Amy talked about how Matthew's illness got worse at the same time she began to suffer from undiagnosed chronic Lyme disease. She said, "Between my illness, Matthew's illness, and some other traumatic family circumstances, it often felt like we were living in this underground bunker. We were here, existing on planet Earth, but not really engaging with the real world or real people. We would occasionally lift that hatch and look out long enough to survey the land. Then the next wave of chaos would hit, and we'd have to hunker down, hold on to each other, and pray to make it through." Unfortunately, it seems like Rick Warren has just been hit with another round of devastating news, and this time, it's targeted at his health. Despite his widespread influence and success, Rick Warren has not been without controversy. Over the years, he has faced criticism on various fronts, from his approach to church growth and theology to his views on social and political issues. One popular criticism Rick has had to deal with is his strategy for church growth. Imagine being part of a church that suddenly shifts its approach and comes up with new programs, different worship styles, and a fresh vision out of nowhere. While this may be exciting for some people, it's definitely unsettling for others. Not everyone knows how to cope with change, especially the type that happens so fast. Here's what happened. Rick Warren introduced the purpose-driven model to help churches grow by focusing on clear purposes: worship, fellowship, discipleship, ministry, and mission. While this approach energized many, it also caused serious disagreements in some churches. It created a buzz not just in the Christian community, but in the general media. In fact, it became so controversial that in 2006, the Wall Street Journal reported that some congregations split or had conflicts over these changes. To address the controversy, Rick eventually acknowledged these challenges. He emphasized that, while he supported promoting church growth and adaptation, he didn't support efforts to expel members of the church who didn't agree with the strategy. But things got even more controversial for Rick Warren. In December 2008, he found himself at the center of a national debate. The entire controversy began when President-elect Barack Obama invited Rick to deliver the invocation at his inauguration, a choice that surprised many. Why had Obama chosen someone like Rick, who didn't share the same beliefs as him? It got even more complicated because Warren had openly supported California's Proposition 8, a measure defining marriage as between a man and a woman. This stance eventually led to accusations of promoting hate speech, especially from the queer community advocates. They were concerned that Rick's views didn't align with the inclusive message of the incoming administration. However, President Obama defended his choice by pointing out the importance of communication between different perspectives. Obama also noted that he had been invited to speak at Saddleback despite his differing views on gay people, and that it was this kind of peaceful dialogue that he wanted to implement in inviting Warren. Rick Warren had also found himself in the middle of yet another controversy when he began making commitments to promoting interfaith dialogue. In 2006, he visited Syria and met with President Bashar al-Assad, and this move didn't go down well with some church leaders and critics. Rick was questioned about the wisdom of engaging with a regime known for its human rights violations. However, He clarified that his intentions were to foster peace and understanding, not to endorse any political stance. To make matters worse, in 2009 and 2012, Warren attended Islamic conferences, encouraging collaboration between Christians and Muslims to address global issues. Of course, some evangelical leaders criticized these actions, saying that they might blur some doctrinal lines. As you can already imagine, Warren responded by making it clear that it was his mission to build friendships and work collectively on humanitarian goals. Apart from Rick Warren's personal controversies, his church, Saddleback, has also had its fair share of criticism and controversies. In 2021, Saddleback Church made headlines when they went ahead to ordain 3 women as pastors. Keep in mind that this move was so controversial because it challenged the traditional stance of the Southern Baptist Convention, which believes that pastoral roles should be reserved for men. The ordination sparked so much controversy that it eventually led the Southern Baptist Convention to begin investigating Saddleback's alignment with its doctrinal beliefs. Eventually, in February 2023, Saddleback Church was expelled from the fellowship. And the primary reason for the expulsion was cited as the church's continued practice of appointing women to pastoral positions, including the hiring of Stacy Wood, wife of the new lead pastor Andy Wood, as a teaching pastor. Although Saddleback appealed this decision, the convention upheld the expulsion. Despite the expulsion, Saddleback initially expressed a desire to maintain its affiliation with the California Southern Baptist Convention. However, in October 2023, the church decided to withdraw from the state convention as well, so it could prevent further division within the broader Baptist community. That's not all. In 2003, Rick and Kay Warren launched the Peace Plan, a global initiative aimed at addressing 5 significant problems, which are spiritual emptiness, self-serving leadership, poverty, disease, and illiteracy. While the plan received praise for its ambitious goals, it also faced criticism. Some critics argued that the initiative lacked cultural sensitivity and imposed Western values on diverse communities. Additionally, surprising concerns were raised about the effectiveness and sustainability of the programs implemented under this plan. For more than 40 years, Rick Warren dedicated his life to serving God, growing Saddleback Church from a small Bible study in his home into one of the largest and most influential churches in America, and changing millions of lives around the world with his books and humanitarian efforts. However, behind the scenes, something very tragic was happening that most people didn't know about. In 2021, Rick started experiencing some serious health problems. At first, it wasn't clear what was wrong. He had constant muscle spasms, pain, and extreme sleep deprivation. The symptoms became so severe that they started affecting his ability to function normally. Imagine trying to lead a huge ministry while your body is constantly working against you. But make no mistake, this was a lot of work and a huge adjustment for Rick. For decades, Rick was used to being the guy in charge, the one leading the church, making the big decisions, and delivering powerful sermons every week. And the truth is, having to take a step back and trust others to carry the vision forward was one of the hardest things he's ever done. But it was also an important lesson about how quickly things can turn around. You're probably wondering how members of Saddleback Church and the entire Christian community reacted to this shocking development. Well, although Rick had always been open about his struggles, from his personal pain to his recent health challenges, hearing him say the words confirming that he was stepping away from the pulpit hit hard. It was like the moment when a father sits his children down and tells them he's handing over the family business. And father-in-law and a lot of friends from this church that I love that are already in heaven, you understand the decision, but your heart still struggles to accept it. For some, it felt like losing a spiritual mentor. For others, it was a bittersweet reminder that nothing stays the same forever. But the good thing is that Rick Warren had spent years mentoring young leaders and preparing for the day when someone else would take over. Now, that moment finally arrived. In his announcement, Rick introduced Andy Wood, a pastor from Northern California, as the man who would take over from him and lead Saddleback Church into its next chapter. For some, this was a relief. At least Rick wasn't leaving the church without a plan. But for others, it was an emotional shift. It's like when your favorite teacher retires and a new one takes their place. You know the new person is qualified, but it's hard to imagine anyone else filling that role. And so, people were curious. Would Andy preach the same way? Would the church feel different? While many were ready to embrace the transition, there were still some who struggled with the idea of a new leader. After all, Rick Warren wasn't just a pastor, he was the pastor, the one who baptized their kids, counseled them through hard times, and spoke words that seemed to come straight from God's heart. For those who had been at Saddleback since the beginning, it felt almost impossible to imagine Sundays without him on stage. And let's be honest, change is hard, even when it's necessary. Some members also expressed their worries about the future of Saddleback. Some wondered, would the church still have the same vision? Would it still feel like home? These weren't just casual concerns. For a lot of people, this was the only church family they had ever known, and they weren't sure how it would feel without the leader who had built it. Well, despite all the emotions, the uncertainty, and even the controversy, one thing became clear to everyone. Saddleback Church wasn't going anywhere, but Rick's health issues and retirement aren't the only challenges he and Saddleback have had to endure in the past. As a matter of fact, the church has been hit with several shocking controversies that have impacted not just the public image of the church, but also that of its leader, Rick Warren. Rick Warren has definitely faced some tough times, but his impact on the church is undeniable. What do you think? Will he rise above this challenge, or is this the start of a new chapter for him? Let us know in the comments, and if you found this video interesting, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any updates.